Good day, everyone. I am John Villarante, representative of Group 5. I am here to discuss about China versus Japan, Asia's other great game. The topic itself has 6 parts and I am here to discuss the first 3 parts of it. Before we get started, let's watch these short clips first.
Communist China as we know it was formed after a bitter and bloody civil war. But a battle between the nationalists and communists was put on hold for 8 years when the rivals had to unite to fight off a greater threat, Japan. China's conflict with Japan began in September 1931. The Imperial Japanese Army planted an explosion on a railway line in a region then known as Manchuria. Japan then set up a puppet state called Manchukuo and appointed China's ousted emperor Pu Yi as its leader. This marked the start of Japan's occupation of China. At the time, China's civil war between the nationalists and communists had been going on for 4 years. Over the next 6 years, the factions continued to battle, while both clashed with Japanese forces. In 1937, they formed the United Front to fight their common enemy. But their joint efforts did little to deter Japan's ambition and expanding empire. On July 7, 1937, Japan claimed that China kidnapped one of its soldiers and used this as a reason to declare war. Japanese forces launched a full-blown invasion of China and swiftly occupied Beijing. By October, Shanghai had fallen, and in December, Japan took Nanjing. One of the biggest atrocities during Japan's occupation of China was a 7-week killing spree in Nanjing. According to Chinese figures, some 300,000 people, mostly civilians, were slaughtered. Japan continued to gain Chinese territory over the next 2 years. The Second World War broke out in Europe in 1939, and Japan entered a formal alliance with Nazi Germany and Italy the following year.
The first Japanese bomb was dropped.
December 7, 1941. Japan, fearing an inevitable confrontation with the United States, launched a preemptive strike against a U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It drew the U.S. into the war, and China officially joined forces with the Allies.
Fire and ruin in China has ever...
Although the Chinese Nationalist Army was beset by corruption, poor leadership, and lack of significant air power, it did have some successes against the Japanese. In 1941 and 1942, the Chinese army won battles in Shango and Changsha. Japan retreated after facing fierce counterattacks. The Chinese army was part of the Allied effort that eventually forced the capitulation of the Japanese armies in Burma. Chinese forces under U.S. General Joe Vinegar Stilwell were heavily committed to the fighting there to keep the Allied supply lines open.
Actual pictures of the atomic bomb.
Finally, in August 1945, the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, forcing its surrender, which was made official on September 2nd.
Long years of plunder, murder.
During the 8 years of battle, China lost an estimated 20 million people. More than 80 million became refugees, and at least 200,000 Chinese women were abducted by the Japanese to be used as comfort women or sex slaves. Although the Japanese had been driven out of China, peace did not return for long. The Civil War resumed in 1946.
The troops of Mao Zedong marched...
After another 3 years of conflict, the Communists defeated the Nationalists in 1949 and established the People's Republic of China.
Part 1. With China's forgotten rivalry. From economics to political influence and security issues, United States and China policies are seen as inherently conflictual, creating an uneasy relationship, even a new Cold War, between the 2 giant nations that affects other nations inside Asia and out. But because of this competition for global, China and their long rivalry with their neighbor country Japan. China-Japan rivalry is a simple sideshow by the China and US when it comes to major power clash in Asia. For 1,000 years, China and Japan have been locked in a relationship even more mutually dependent, competitive, and influential than the much more recent political wars between the USA and China. Each has sought to dominate or at least be the most influential state in Asia, and the relations of each with its neighbors have at various points been directly shaped by their rivalry. The current competition between China and America has the greatest direct impact on Asia today, particularly in the security sphere. America have a long-standing alliances, including with Japan, most especially after the World War II. Most American and even Asian observers presume that it is the Sino-American relationship that will determine Asia's future, if not the globe's for the foreseeable future. Yet, the competition between China and Japan has been of far longer duration, and its importance should not be underestimated. Part 2. We named it as Historical Ties Between China and Japan. China and Japan share a long history through trade, cultural exchanges, friendship, and conflict. Cross-cultural contacts before 1600 strongly influenced Japan, particularly from China, with its writing system, architecture, culture, religion, philosophy, and law. The earliest references to Sino-Japanese relation are in the context of China's intervention on the Korean peninsula, with which ancient Japan had long-standing exchanges. The broad contours of Sino-Japanese relation thus become clear early on, a competition for influence and assertion by both of their respective superiority, and an entanglement with Asia's geopolitical balance. Despite the passing of 2 millennia, the base of this relationship has changed little. Today, a new wrinkle has been added to the equation. Whereas over the previous centuries only one of the two nations generally was powerful, influential, or internationally engaged in any given era. Today, both China and Japan are strong, united, global players and well aware of others' strengths and their own weaknesses. Part 3. We called it as Differences between China and Japan. The 2 decades of extraordinary economic growth has vaulted China into becoming the world's largest economy, and Japan has seen a concomitant quarter-century of apparent economic stagnation. Yet the same claim would have sounded just as unrealistic back in 1980, except in reverse when Japan had racked up years of double-digit and high single-digit economic returns, while China had barely emerged from the generational disaster of Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Just a few decades ago, Japan was predicted to be the global financial power par excellence, countered by the United States. Based on geographical size, Japan as an island powers can rarely compete with cohesive continental states like China. Even during its periods of disunity, many of China's fragmented and competing states were nearly as large as or larger than all of Japan. Since 1990, the tide has reversed and China has come to occupy an even more dominant global position than Tokyo could have imagined at the height of its post-war prominence. If international power can crudely be comprising political influence, economic dynamism, and military strength, then Japan fully developed only its economic potential after World War II, and even then lost its positions After a few decades, China has come to dominate international political forums while building the world's second most powerful military and becoming the largest trading partner of over 100 nations around the globe. Yet while one is ranked above the other of comparative terms, both China and Japan today are wealthy, powerful nations and not just in Asia, but in the whole world.